of the green. Swamp Thing.
What's up everyone, it's Kate here and welcome back to Marvelous Videos. Today we take a look at the top 6 Swamp Thing villains. Besides publishing rousing stories of heroic adventures and detective mysteries, DC has a knack for creating some of the most iconic horror comics to ever hit a shelf. From November 1956 to October 1966, DC published the first volume of House of Secrets, an 80-issue anthological run that was peppered with elements of mystery, fantasy, and unfiltered blood-curdling horror. The idea was to create a fun, immersive experience for readers that wouldn't demand the kind of fanaticism that their more mainstream properties tend to inspire. And though the stories were mostly of no consequence, a couple of characters did manage to make their way into the main DC universe. One of them happens to be the most underrated member of the Justice League of America. Yes, we're talking about Swamp Thing. Debuting in what was supposed to be a standalone story as part of the House of Secrets issue 92, fan support for the character was so high that DC decided to give it a more expanded role in the DCU, as well as its standalone series. Being the avatar of the green, the elemental force that connects all plant life within the universe, Swamp Thing, formerly botanist Alec Holland, protects both plant life and mankind from threats of any nature, including the ones emanating from it. Over the years, Swamp Thing has achieved cult status, becoming one of the strongest elemental beings in the universe, and even managing to inspire the friggin' life entity. That being said, it also makes him dangerous for those seeking to exploit either of his jurisdictions, giving Swamp Thing a diverse and unique gallery of rogues. With the Swamp Thing TV series at our heels, let's look at the best of them. These are the top 6 Swamp Thing villains explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Floronic Man. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The earth laughs in flowers." Normal people like you and I would equate that with poetry. Gardner Fox and Murphy Anderson saw that and thought, hey, that's not a bad idea for a supervillain character. Debuting in the Atom issue 1 all the way back in 1962, Jason Woodrue wasn't always an inhabitant of Earth. Originating in the Dryad dimension that existed parallel to Earth, he was a rogue mad scientist who travelled to Earth after being exiled from his own dimension. He used his exhaustive knowledge of botany and chlorokinetic abilities to grow exotic lifelike plant organisms in an attempt to take over the planet, calling himself the Plant Master. Though Woodrue would be defeated and sent back to his own dimension by the Atom, he'd return in Flash issue 245, ingesting a concoction that would transform him into what we know him as today. He became a plant-human hybrid, with skin as strong as the bark of an oak and hair as green as leaves. Calling himself the Floronic Man, his first attempt at terrorizing the world was pelting Green Lantern with seeds and cacti, but he'd soon grow into an ecology-destabilizing menace after coming into contact with the yin to his ever-degrading yang, Swamp Thing. The two green men cross paths during Alan Moore's exceptional run with the character, specifically Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 21. Believing Swamp Thing's body held the key to Alec Holland's biorestorative formula, General Sunderland brought in Floronic Man to study his body. Thus began his manic obsession with the avatar of the green, as Floronic Man was fascinated by Swamp Thing's actual biocomposition, which was always assumed to be a mutated version of Holland's own body. The revelation that Swamp Thing was actually a collection of biomass imbued with the consciousness of Alec Holland was too much for the hero to handle, and he snapped under its weight, laying waste to General Sunderland and escaping the facility. He gave up on his quest for humanity and took root in the Louisiana swamp, which allowed Woodrue to experiment on him and come into contact with the green, which corrupts him and turns him into a flesh-hating, genocidal maniac. He tries to eliminate all animal life on Earth, and it takes everything Swamp Thing has to stop the green and make it appreciate the role of animals in the ecosystem. His appearances have been sporadic since, but nevertheless, Floronic Man is the anti-Swamp Thing, and that alone merits his appearance on this list. We hope that changes now that the TV show is on the way, and if we're being honest, we just want to see some weird plants do some weird things. Anton Arcane. Imagine any of the most heinous crimes that one can possibly commit. Chances are, this guy's done all those things and then some. Anton Arcane is a character straight out of a Clive Barker novel. Born at the beginning of the 20th century, Arcane displayed signs of depravity, hedonism, and a disturbing penchant for violence since a young age, actively abusing his siblings when his father wasn't around. Anton developed a deep interest in biological science and enrolled in Hamburg School of Medicine, eager to explore his own appetites, until he was expelled for unethical surgical experiments, among a dozen other gut-wrenching violations, all in an attempt to become immortal. Arcane enlisted in the German military during World War I and became a field doctor at the Western Front, where he dementedly experimented on the mortally wounded. It was during his tenure of service that he would meet his arch-nemesis and object of obsession. Arcane was invited to Hans von Hammer's home to heal a soldier's peculiar injuries, held together by plant matter. Upon arriving, he was immediately recognized by the entity that would become his lifelong enemy in the future, a time-displaced Swamp Thing. Fascinated by Swamp Thing's existence, Anton restricts the creature, hoping to make it his own. Using a mix of science and sorcery, as well as the mystical claw of Alcond, Anton tries to figure out the secret of Swamp Thing's immortality. When he fails to do so, he decides that he will scour the earth for every source of occult power he can find, and use it to gain immortality, going so far as instigating World War II by influencing Hitler, in order to create a steady supply of sacrifices. Since then, he's been locked in an eternal battle struggle with Swamp Thing that has taken him to the furthest regions of human existence, including Hell. In the New 52 reboot, he was introduced as the Avatar of the Rot, the direct antithesis of the life-generating Green. Now, being fueled by rot energy, Anton Arcane became more unkillable. Being immortal, the only way to kill him is through sorcery or eternal limbo. Before New 52, only Arcane's soul was immortal, and he needed new bodies to keep himself alive. Also, he was able to control dead bodies via necromancy, as well as employ his exceptional surgical skills to create a legion of deformed monsters to take on the forces of the living. After becoming the Avatar of the Rot, Arcane can control death, decay, and rot with his sheer willpower, and his immortality extends to his entire being. Using his newfound powers, Arcane proceeded to take on the forces of both the Green and the Red, and actually managed to infect the Green with rot before he was expelled from it, and the Parliament of Trees managed to cure the Green of its affliction. Even after death, he continued to be a thorn in Swamp Thing's side, and it was only when he was imbued with a life entity that Swamp Thing finally got rid of Arcane once and for all. Unmen. Though they couldn't be farther apart on the moral compass, Anton Arcane and Victor Frankenstein share at least one similarity. They're both naturally curious about the nature of life, and have dabbled in necromancy to reveal its secrets. But that's where the similarities end, because while Frankenstein created his monster purely as an experiment, Anton Arcane made his with the intent to serve as soldiers. Result of his first experimentations in the pursuit of immortality, the Unmen are a genetically altered subspecies of beings, no two of whom are alike. Bernie Wrightson depicted them as hideously deformed humanoid creatures that exist only as a grotesque menagerie of bodily aberrations. Multiple heads, extra limbs, and even partial animal anatomies can be found amongst their subservient ranks. They were made to become perfect soldiers who are infinitely adaptable, never complain, and always follow orders. Arcane super soldiers could adapt to any environment, were completely devoid of fear, and some even possessed enhanced capabilities, thanks to their creators' scientific and sorcerous abilities. Chief among them were Ophidian, a talking snake-like creature with 10 pairs of legs and the power of hypnosis, and Cranius, Arcane's majordomo and the leader of the Unmen. Called the Living Brain, Cranius has an uncomfortably oversized brain with a human face that is grafted onto a gargantuan human hand. Cranius uses his fingers for locomotion and is shown to have telepathic powers in later appearances. Being Arcane's chief lackeys, the Unmen have gone up against Swamp Thing on a number of occasions, but have never managed to finish the job, and almost always managed to mutiny against their maker. After the first generation of Unmen turned on him, Arcane created the next using insects as his base, hoping that their comparatively simpler cognition patterns would keep them from rebelling again. Alas, it wasn't meant to be, and they turned on him yet again, this time devouring their creator and leaving no trace behind. Fueled by primal rage, depravity, and an endless streak of pure madness, the Unmen were the perfect cannon fodder for Swamp Thing, and we can't wait to see the deliciously twisted versions that the new TV series whips up. Monagla. If you've been getting a positively Lovecraftian vibe from this list so far, we can't blame you. After all, Swamp Thing originated from a scary story, but all the Floronic Mans and Anton Arcanes of the cosmos cannot hold a candle to the great god of cancer himself, created by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson as a homage to Lovecraft's seminal work. He manifested on Earth 200,000 years ago, living in obscurity and controlling the growth of sentient life on our planet, and countless others scattered across the cosmos. He handpicked the various life forms that would prosper and survive their own evolution, and the ones that would serve only as food. When humanity began prospering, he started whispering into the minds of a select few, people who exhibited an intense fascination with death and the macabre, to be more specific. In 1827, Monagla inspired Edgar Allan Poe. In 1866, he reached out to stimulate the creative energy of Ambrose Bierce. In 1896, his essence touched the mind of a 6-year-old boy from Providence, Rhode Island, named Howard Phillips Lovecraft, who would become one of the most acclaimed writers of horror fiction in the history of world literature. Years later, a man named Abraham Monroe used the Necronomicon to invoke Monagla's essence, which took on a physical form and rooted itself in the mines of Purditon, New England. That is where Swamp Thing has his first encounter with the Cancer God, in Swamp Thing Volume 1, Issue 8, when he's warned by a dying old man to not go inside the town and especially its mines. Being the hero that he is, Swampy enters Tunnel 13 and comes face to face with the writhing mass of flesh and tentacles that is Monagla. In many ways, he's one of the worst cosmic horrors that Swamp Thing has ever faced. Being effectively an elder god, he's immortal, and has a grotesque form that inspires fear and madness in anyone who gazes upon him. Since he doesn't have a mouth, he uses telepathy to communicate and manipulate the minds of those susceptible to his presence. Monagla is like a predatory hive mind that assimilates bioorganic life forms like rats, rabbits, and human beings to increase its own body mass. He can also produce a toxin that infects the minds of those exposed to it, making them his thralls and giving them ugly body modifications, in the form of things like boils and warts. He attacks Swamp Thing because he wants to use his body to fulfill his purpose, and emerge as the despotic ruler of all creation. Even after being trapped in Tunnel 13 by the Avatar of the Green, he manages to free himself and moves to Ivytown, and continues his campaign of malevolent global domination against the all-new Atom. Nebiros. We've seen gods, aliens, and the cumulative spirit of decay itself make an appearance on this list. It's about time we saw our first demon. Although he's going to be remembered forever as the archenemy of the Blue Devil, we're here to remind you that before he was terrorizing film sets and the Justice League, Nebiros was summoned to Earth to take care of Swamp Thing, debuting in Swamp Thing Volume 1, Issue 15. While he was wounded and searching for Matt Cable in the swamps of Louisiana, the mass of plant matter that thought it was Alec Holland came across a benevolent preacher, who offers to heal him, as all things on Earth were created by God, and were thus recipients of his love. He should have known Father Jonathan Bliss was a fraud when he came across his dilapidated old church, but Swampy was too weak to even question him, and the old man's smile was reassuring at a time when he was going through an existential crisis. Father Bliss took advantage of Swamp Thing's humanity and trapped his soul in an orb that was a former prison of Nebiros. Now free and inhabiting Swamp Thing's immortal body, Nebiros could finally enact his grand scheme of destroying the worlds that God had created. He would have probably succeeded too if Matt and Abby didn't open Father Bliss's eyes to Nebiros' deception. Bliss had been led to believe that only Armageddon would bring God back to his children, but all that was a lie that Nebiros had fed him. Now free to do as he pleased, he proceeded to collect the souls of Matt and Abby to empower himself and exact his revenge. And if it wasn't for Father Bliss's change of heart, he probably would have gotten away with it too. Being a demon from hell, Nebiros is impervious to any mortal damage. Punches, kicks, stabs, heck, bullets won't work against this guy. He also possesses superhuman strength, the ability to increase his power by absorbing souls, and can fire deathly eldritch blasts from his eyes that can kill you. Or worse, fuse your clothing to your body. Just ask Daniel Cassidy. However, because he's a demon, he is especially susceptible to magic and cosmic powers. Father Bliss banished him to hell by performing an exorcism on him, and all his future defeats involve magical forces. Though he hasn't appeared in a Swamp Thing storyline since, Nebiros will always be remembered as the guy who actually managed to take over Swampy's consciousness and did it in his first attempt. Blight. If the Justice League is a pop band, then Justice League Dark is like its gothic offshoot, where the JLA takes care of physical threats to the world, be they street-level criminals or world-conquering aliens. Justice League Dark specialises in handling supernatural threats. During the events of New 52's first crossover event, Forever Evil, while the mortal realm contends with the threat the crime syndicate of America, Swamp Thing and his peers of the occult must face a living embodiment of evil itself. Debuting in Justice League Dark issue 24, when Chris Esperanza was brought back to life, he did something most of you would probably not have done. See, death is a profound experience, and while Dragon Ball has conditioned us to expect it as a saga-furthering plot device, for Chris it only brought him deep despair. Lamenting the unfairness of his resurrection, he gave in to his emotional turmoil and unleashed the biblical force of evil upon the world. Swamp Thing's team called this Blight. Manifesting itself in Chris's body, the sentient spirit began to drown the earth in its own despair, tapping into the minds of every human being from its perch in the collective unconscious and unlocking their inherent evilness. Because Blight is an entity that originates from emotions, as opposed to having a separate corporeal form, defeating him is next to impossible. John Constantine had to divide his team into two groups to take on Blight in the two realms he was currently infecting, the real world and humanity's collective unconscious. He went so far as to round up the world's three greatest sinners, Pandora, Phantom Stranger, and The Question, in an attempt to take Blight down. The Trinity of Sin was sent into the collective unconscious to defeat Blight from within, with Zuriel joining them later. Swamp Thing's team, meanwhile, took on the physical manifestation of Blight, capable of performing pyrokinesis and sorcery, shapeshifting and being practically invulnerable to anything that wasn't a manifestation of its attacker's inner blights. What happened next was a cosmic showdown for the ages, featuring Swamp Thing as an anthropomorphic shark of all things. Eventually, Swampy and his allies were able to rescue Chris Esperanza's soul from Blight as he assumed his new role as a spirit of redemption, and banish him back into the collective unconscious, which is the only way to defeat this immortal being. He hasn't been heard from since, but looking at the direction DC's Infinite Frontier is taking, and knowing the inherently conflicted nature of most sentient life, we think it's only a matter of time before Swamp Thing must contend with Blight's ethereal snakes once again. And we don't think he's going to be happy about hearing that. And that's it for our list of the top 6 Swamp Thing villains. We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, and have a great day. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks.